being told you have exactly 6 hours to explore a brand new and expansive build of Elden Ring is both an exciting and a terrifying prospect. You're immediately thinking about where to go, what to do, how to carefully spend your time to get the most information from the experience. It's a lot of pressure, but it's also an exhilarating time that makes you feel like a true adventurer, setting off into unmapped territory with absolutely no idea what you might find around any given corner. Here are our impressions with a full unrestricted 6 hours with Elden Ring. Bear in mind, unfortunately, we were unable to capture our own gameplay, but we do have some brand new B-roll for you to enjoy. That might just mean that what we're describing and what you're seeing won't quite match up all the time. Oh, and there may be some spoilers with regards to locations and potential boss characters, so be aware of that if you're planning on going into the game totally fresh. Enjoy! Unlike the closed network test, which allowed a number of lucky individuals to trial some early areas of the game back in November 2021 with 5 pre-selected and pre-buffed builds, this Elden Ring preview allowed us to choose from any of the 10 starting builds that will likely be present in the final game. But things are still subject to change at this point. These builds we were able to choose from are Prisoner, Samurai, Prophet, Astrologer, Bandit, Hero, Warrior, Vagabond, Wretch, and Confessor. The Wretch is your typical naked but for a loincloth avatar, who has a starting skill of 10 in pretty much every stat. The Confessor and Prophet are your high faith builds, while Astrologer is the high intelligence caster of the lot. Vagabond has decent vigor and strength, while the Samurai prioritizes higher dexterity, endurance, and strength. Hero looks to be the obvious starting choice for melee strength builds, with high strength, vigor, and endurance. But, do remember, all of these exist solely to give you a small head start on leveling and equipment. As you progress through the game, you can spend runes, Elden Ring's version of souls, to improve any skill as you see fit and create characters that fit your own playstyle. For example, in this preview, I went with Astrologer, but over the course of playing, spent a few points in strength as well as intelligence, so that I could switch between a staff or a sword if the occasion called for it. My build ended up sort of resembling the Enchanted Knight class that appeared in the closed network test, minus the fancy armor and a few of their later spells. Because be warned, if you did partake in the closed beta and were hoping to retrace your steps in the main game, things are different here. If you thought Elden Ring was going to be easier, think again. Items have been switched around or moved, bosses drop different items, and any armor or weapons or ashes of war that you grew quite attached to, you can bet you won't get your hands on those for a little while yet. Some NPCs and collectible summons have moved around as well, and some brand new characters have turned up to grant you new tidbits of lore or some other tips along the way. All of these feel like necessary changes to keep things fresh and, most importantly, challenging for these early stages of the game, though that's not to say we didn't need a little bit of time to adjust at first. This preview allowed us to start a new game from the very beginning, which included character customization and a look at the intro voiceover and introduction to the world of Elden Ring. Character customization included choosing a gift. These ranged from golden seeds, cracked pots, and stone sword keys to a boiled prawn. As for the intro, we don't know whether this is a final version, but it covers the shattering of the Elden Ring in the lands between, how this shattering caused Queen Marika the Eternal to vanish, how in an event called the Night of the Black Knives, Godwyn the Golden was the first to perish. It then goes on to say that Marika's children, demigods all, claimed the shards of the Elden Ring and triggered a war, called the Shattering, where no winners emerged. The Tarnished, dead who yet live, follow the call of grace now long lost and seek to become an Elden Lord. But of course, they aren't the only ones. And the intro names many characters who will doubtless turn out to be boss battles or ill-fated NPCs. Maybe even both. There's Horalo, chieftain of the Badlands, Goldmask, Fia, the deathbed companion, the Dung Eater, and Sir Gideon Ofnir, the all-knowing. An intriguing bunch for sure, and we look forward to dying at their hands multiple times in the not too distant future. After that intro, we end up in control of our character in an unfamiliar location, aptly named the Chapel of Anticipation. It's a classic FromSoft gambit where we have a little bit of an explore of the area before dying to a very powerful foe. This one had multiple limbs and sort of resembled the creature players fought behind a closed door in Stormvale Castle in the closed beta to receive a rusty key. Once dispatched, we awake in the same crypt from the beta where we can complete the optional tutorial before eventually emerging in Limgrave. From here, a lot of our starting steps were similar to those in the beta for the purposes of leveling up and grabbing some decent gear. One thing that had changed was summons were now slightly more difficult to obtain, and we could only use them once visited by a mysterious snow witch in the Church of Ella, who gifted us the Spirit Bell. We met a new NPC at the abandoned shack on the Stormvale Castle approach, who told us that all of their companions had been slaughtered and their limbs, legs, arms, heads, had all been grafted for use by the castle lord Godric. Grafting, it would soon become clear after actually entering the castle, is a bit of a theme there. Before retreading those steps though, we made use of the fact that the whole area seemed wide open for exploration. Journeying south, beyond Agiel Lake and some hostile encampments, we eventually came to the so-called Weeping Peninsula, accessed via an enigmatically named Sacrificial Bridge. On the forlorn landscape of the Weeping Peninsula, you'll find poisoned swamps, a Miyazaki specialty of course, and small, wandering, chimera-like beasts who almost look like they might have been human once. We also met a woman by the side of the road who said she'd run from Castle Morn, which was now lost to evil beasts. Her father was still there, she said, though she feared the castle lost, so she bade us take him a letter. Further down that path, towards where we supposed the castle was, we were suddenly laid siege by giant arrows from a huge golem. Thankfully, their health was already low, so we're able to get in close and finish them off without too much trouble, before taking a lift to Castle Morn. Here, in a great courtyard, lies a vast mountain of burning bodies, surrounded by more of those winged creatures. Dodging a pumpkin-headed knight, we ascend a ladder to the ramparts of the castle, where in the aftermath of a battle, some guards and creatures are still locked in battle. There's also a hidden site of grace behind the castle where some tougher enemies are guarding some treasure. Making our way to the highest point in the castle exterior, we finally fight our way to the lady's father and deliver the letter, though he declares he cannot leave. Once this was done, we actually couldn't find anywhere else to explore in Castle Morn, though whether that's because of this particular build, or perhaps because of where we were, relatively early on in Elden Ring's story, we don't know. But we did make one last journey back to the lady who gave us the letter in the first place, only to find her slaughtered on the ground. Returning to where her father once sat in the castle only revealed him to have disappeared too. Perhaps there'll be a way to save one or both of them in the final game. After you've explored Limgrave a little bit and proven yourself to Melina, the mysterious woman who levels you up in return for runes, she'll whisk you off to the Round Table Hold, a safe haven existing somewhere outside of the world that can only be reached via Sites of Grace or selecting its icon on the Overworld map. The Round Table Hold is where Tarnished gather, and on entering for the first time, you're instructed that there is a strict pact of non-aggression in effect, so combat is prohibited. The Quiet Hub is filled with NPCs to talk to, so this rule may exist solely to protect them. But we did wonder if other players could coexist with you here too. As for those NPCs, these include a prophet that will teach you faith-based spells, a blacksmith, curiously imprisoned here and made to toil away upgrading or crafting equipment for Tarnished, and a few other colourful characters, some useful and some ominously silent. Perhaps the most interesting, though, is Fia, the deathbed companion, who was mentioned in the opening to the game. She tells you that where she comes from, it's her custom and duty to lie with and hold those close to death. Interpret that how you will. She's got a lot of fascinating backstory though, and as Tarnished, she'll offer to hold you as often as you like. This will bestow a temporary blessing on you, though we aren't entirely sure what exactly this buffs. In Fia's room, you'll also find a dressing table that allows you to re-enter the character creation screen and essentially customize your appearance however you like, as often as you like. We'll be really keen to see if and how Fia's story deepens as the game progresses. Back in the Overworld, we journeyed into the east of Stormvale Castle, beyond the riders and bandit encampments to find a relatively serene meadow, where in the midst of fighting off a small band of demi-humans, we heard someone calling for help. This person, standing atop some ruins, introduced himself as Kenneth Haight, claiming to be royalty driven from his castle. He promised us all sorts of rewards should we help him regain his throne, but there was something just a little bit off about Kenneth, so we'll be keeping an eye on him for the final game. Journeying into the woods near the meadow, we spotted several absolutely gigantic bears. Some players managed to reach one of these enemies in the closed demo, and a few mistakenly referred to it as a mini-boss. It actually doesn't seem to be. There are several wandering around the woods and all are stacked and utterly deadly. So we did what any underleveled player with a serious time restriction would do and ran away. Not far from the bears though, we found an initially unassuming domed building with nothing inside but a lift. Pulling its lever sent us underground. Very, very far underground. So far in fact that we began to wonder if the lift would ever actually stop. But it did, and suddenly we were in a gorgeous purple and blue-hued landscape that, as the text explained once we stepped out of the lift, was beneath the Siofra River. This whole subterranean area was absolutely vast and initially populated only by a large number of very slow-moving but hard-hitting humanoids. We eventually came upon some grandiose ruins where something resembling a giant undead stag lay completely motionless. We do wonder though if there might be a way to change that, because it really did have the air of a future boss fight about it. Back on the surface, there were a few other things we discovered. Far to the south, we found a place called the Tower of Return. There wasn't much there, save for a few basic enemies, but climbing to the top of the tower, we found a chest. After doing the obligatory hit it once in case it's a mimic, hey, old habits die hard, we open it up only to be informed that it was after all a trap, and we're being teleported somewhere. A few seconds later, we reappear in a beautiful stone courtyard. It's really brightly lit and there are golden leaves falling all around us. On-screen text tells us this is Lanedell, the royal capital. Checking on the map screen, we are indeed still inside the Lands Between, but far, far, far to the north of Limgrave. There's a site of grace here and some stone steps that lead to a fight with a giant golem, who crushes us into powder despite repeated attempts at combat. There are a few chests to loot around the area though, so it's not a totally lost trip before we use the Site of Grace to travel back to Limgrave. We'll defeat the golem some other day. Another boss we encountered was at the foot of the many huge golden trees scattered about the landscape in Limgrave. The approach to this was marked by multiple twisted plant-like creatures, and underneath the tree itself is a huge scattering of large broken pots, and a boss named the Erd Tree Avatar, a gnarled, tree-like monstrosity that came at us fast and aggressively. It was a fairly tough fight, helped along with a summon, and the rewards were items that could be mixed in our Flask of Wondrous Physic to produce different buffs and effects. There didn't seem to be any big worldly change to defeating this boss, but it's probably worth mentioning that it is marked on the map with a golden minor Erd Tree symbol. Finally, beyond Market the Fellowman at the entrance to Stormvale Castle, we were able to take the quiet path around the outside of the castle to reach the door formerly locked with the rusty key. The many-limbed beast that previously dropped it was now replaced with a heavily armoured guard, but the technique to defeating them was much the same. From here, we were finally able to ascend the ladder that signalled the end of the demo in the closed network test, and finally reach the ramparts above, where eagles with knives on their feet lobbing exploding barrels around awaited us. This was actually quite a tough area given how large it was. We were ducking and fighting around lots of fairly tough guards, through great halls where bodies and limbs were strewn and hung, no doubt for the grafting process we'd heard so much about earlier. In a small chapel, tucked away from any immediate danger, we met a sorcerer who could teach us some spells for a price, but shortly after venturing a little deeper and falling foul to more guard patrols, our time with Elden Ring was sadly up. 6 hours isn't nearly enough time with this game, even with all the time we'd previously sunk into the closed beta, which was more than 20 hours. We deliberately set out to discover new things and felt we were barely able to scratch the surface of what was on offer. The great and terrible thing that strikes you is the freedom. Sites of Grace give off a golden trail that subtly points you towards a next objective, but you can completely ignore that and strike out in whatever direction you want. It's impressive when you consider how From Software must consider how every player might pace themselves, as they each explore the map in their own way. And yet, progression feels entirely up to you. And that is frightening in itself, given how danger lurks absolutely everywhere, even in the least expected places. Will you take a chance and reach out and touch a mysterious mirror or a suspicious stone tablet? Will you open that chest, not knowing if it may mean sudden doom? Mistrust of random inanimate objects aside, Elden Ring feels freeing in ways From Software games haven't before. Perhaps in part due to fear of the unknown, but also fear of the great unknown expanse that lies ahead. If you're struggling with a particular area or boss, simply fast travel or summon Torrent and ride your way out of there, and you'll find a myriad other directions you can explore in. I might have felt pressure during the timed preview, but this will surely feel extremely freeing in the final game, when you can take things at your own pace, go your own route, indulge in the freedom that the open world offers you. There's difficulty and challenge there, yes, but there's also promise that you can overcome it however you wish. It's freedom. Great and terrible freedom. If you enjoyed this preview, do make sure to like and subscribe to Eurogamer because we have so much more Elden Ring content yet to come on the channel. Maybe check out one of the videos on screen now while you wait. If you're new here, we post a brand new video every single day, so there is always something new to watch. And we'll see you again in the lands between. Bye!